He had come to court for a business matter, but for little girls, sitting silently on a bench altered the course of his life. With just 3 quiet words, "We're hungry," Sir Nicholas Evans stepped into the downtown courthouse just before 10 o'clock a.m., assuming he'd be in and out within 20 minutes. It was meant to be a quick errand, signing off and collecting the final papers for a corporate merger his company had been working on for months. He was dressed in his trademark light gray tailored suit, every aspect of his look precise and spotless. His dark hair was slicked back deliberately, and his cold blue eyes swept across the lobby without hesitation. He moved with the confident grace of a man who was used to doors opening for him without needing to slow down. Time was his most valuable asset, and he handled it with care. As he entered the courthouse's familiar marble foyer, the polished floors reflected the stark glare of overhead lights. Lawyers walked past with urgency. Security guards leaned casually beside metal detectors, and the air carried a mixture of paper and faint perfume. Nicholas glanced at his watch, already calculating his return to the office before lunch. But then, something unusual caught the corner of his eye. 4 little girls were seated quietly on a wooden bench just outside one of the courtrooms. They couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Each of them had blonde hair braided or loosely tied, and their vivid blue eyes stood out. 2 wore pale yellow dresses, the other to soft pink. They sat close together, their small feet hanging above the floor, looking utterly drained. Their presence felt jarringly out of place in a courthouse filled with adults and legal chaos. There were no toys, no parents, no one watching them, just 4 tiny, silent figures huddled together. Nicholas slowed down and turned toward them, something primal within him urging him to stop. He approached carefully so as not to startle them and crouched to meet their gaze. "Are you lost?" he asked gently. One girl in a yellow dress raised her head. Her face remained calm, but her eyes were weary. She gave a faint shake of her head. "No," she replied. "We're waiting." "Waiting for who?" he asked. "Our mom." Another little girl answered. "She's in court." Nicholas looked around. No adult seemed connected to them. "How long have you been here?" he asked. The girl shrugged. "A while. We're hungry." Those last 2 words hit him like a jolt. He looked at them again, really looked. He saw how thin they were, how dry their lips appeared, how their eyes drifted away from his. It was the look of children who had been taught not to ask for more than they were given. They weren't just sitting quietly, they were enduring. Nicholas rose to his feet and scanned the hallway again. Logic told him to walk away. This wasn't his responsibility. He was a CEO, not a child welfare worker. But there was something in their stillness that touched a long dormant nerve inside him. He walked up to the court officer at the nearby desk. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you know who these girls are here with?" The officer looked over briefly, then gave a vague nod. "Yeah, their mom's in the courtroom down the hall. Some theft case. They've been here a while. Nobody came with them." Nicholas frowned. "They've been sitting out here all morning." The officer shrugged. "Think so. Maybe longer." With that, the officer turned back to his paperwork. Nicholas looked at the girls again. "Have you eaten anything today?" he asked. They shook their heads. One of them tried to give a small smile, but it faded before reaching her eyes. Nicholas didn't speak another word. "Wait here," he said, and left the courthouse. 15 minutes later, he returned hands full with bags from the nearest cafe, sandwiches, juice boxes, fresh fruit. He handed the food to the girls, expecting them to tear into it. But they didn't. They opened the bags slowly, carefully. They shared the food between each other, eating quietly, almost gently. It wasn't desperation. It was quiet gratitude. Nicholas sat down beside them on the bench, still unsure why he was even there or what he was feeling, but he couldn't stop watching them. They didn't ask for more. They didn't cry. They didn't plead. And yet, without speaking a word, they were telling him everything. In that silent moment, something inside Nicholas Evans, this man of logic, control, and corporate command, began to shift. Something small inside him cracked open, but the change that happened inside him was permanent. Nicholas stayed seated on that wooden bench far longer than he had ever intended. What was normally just a transition space, a corridor between legal obligations, and formal conclusions had turned into a place where something deep and unfamiliar stirred within him. He kept glancing toward the girls, quietly observing the way they moved, how they interacted without speaking much. They weren't just siblings, they were a bonded unit. One of the girls in pink noticed that the sandwich of the girl in yellow had less filling and quietly handed her own over. Another gently wiped the youngest one's mouth with a napkin and straightened her dress without being asked. It was obvious they had done this before, looked after each other more times than they should have needed to. There was no complaining, no restlessness, no signs of childish mischief, just patience, calm, and a silent hunger. Hunger not only for food, but for a feeling of safety. As they ate, Nicholas leaned back slightly, his eyes resting on the courtroom door across from them. The brass nameplate read Judge Harper. That was where their mother was. He found himself wondering what kind of woman had raised these little girls to be so resilient and heartbreakingly composed. Why did she bring them to court? Why was there no one else with them? Why had no adult stepped in? So many people must have walked past these children, and not one had truly looked. The girl who had first spoken to him turned to face him again. "Are you a lawyer?" she asked. He shook his head gently. "No, I'm just here to collect some paperwork." She tilted her head, looking curious. "You wear a fancy watch like Mr. Garrett." Nicholas blinked. "Who's Mr. Garrett?" She shared a glance with her sister, then looked down. "Mama's boss. He said she did something bad." Her words were simple, but they cut through him like a knife. He leaned forward, voice softer. "Do you know what he said she did?" "She didn't do it." The girl in pink jumped in quickly. "Mama said he lied because he was mad. She said he wanted to do bad things, and when she said no, he got mean." Nicholas took in a deep breath. That single sentence opened up a world of understanding he wasn't prepared for. He knew this kind of man. He'd worked with enough powerful men to recognize how easily they could twist a narrative. Garrett. He didn't even need to know more. The name already painted a picture. A man like Garrett, wealthy, protected, vindictive, could easily ruin someone like Anna Ray with just one accusation, especially if she had no resources, no support, and no voice in her defense. Suddenly, this wasn't about doing a nice thing for some kids. It wasn't about charity. It was about justice. It was about witnessing something broken and realizing that he, of all people, had the means to help fix it. He felt a familiar instinct rise within him, not the usual business drive for strategy and leverage, but the hunger to act, to intervene, to bring out the truth. A courtroom clerk passed by, and Nicholas stood up and stopped him. "The case being held in Judge Harper's room, Anna Ray. Do you have a docket or a summary?" The clerk hesitated. "Are you involved in the case?" "I might be," Nicholas replied, with calm confidence and the kind of measured smile that opened doors in courtrooms and boardrooms alike. "I know her employer. I want to make sure the truth is told." The clerk, recognizing the name from past donations to legal charities, returned a few minutes later with a printed case summary. Nicholas scanned it, his jaw tightening with every line he read. Anna Ray had been charged with theft of personal property. The item in question was a Patek Philippe watch worth more than $8,000. The accusation came from her boss, Garrett Brown, a senior partner at a law firm that wasn't especially large, but had strong political ties. Nicholas knew Garrett. The man had always operated near the edge of shady dealings, but had managed to avoid consequences. He was the type who schmoozed with judges over weekend golf and dismissed harassment complaints as overreactions. The kind of man who knew how to make the system protect him. Then the courtroom doors opened. A small group exited, and among them was a thin, pale woman with tired eyes and a quick, scanning gaze. Her brown hair was tied into a messy bun. Her dress was clean, but clearly used. She clutched a bundle of folders tightly to her chest, and her eyes immediately locked onto the bench. Her face changed the moment she saw her daughters. Urgency overtook the fatigue. She hurried over. "Girls," she said in a strained voice. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would take this long." "Did anyone?" "They ate," said the oldest. "He brought food." The woman looked up at Nicholas, clearly surprised. "You did?" He stood and gave a slight nod. "They told me they were hungry. I couldn't just walk away." Her mouth tightened. She looked like someone not used to accepting help. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to, no," Nicholas replied softly. "But someone should have." She blinked, taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. "I'm Anna," she said after a moment. "Anna Ray, Nicholas Evans," he responded. She froze for a second, recognizing the name. "You're that Nicholas Evans." He gave a modest smile. "It's just a name. You don't belong in this hallway," she said quietly. He glanced at the girls, then back at her. "Maybe today, I do." Anna bit her lip, her arms tightening slightly around herself. Nicholas could see how much effort she was putting into staying composed. Every piece of fear and pride she carried clung to her like armor, but there were cracks. He saw them: fatigue, quiet injustice, the kind of hopelessness that made people stop asking for help. But she didn't beg, she didn't cry, and somehow, that made it all the more powerful. "I read the summary," he said gently. "If there's anything I can do, I know some excellent lawyers." She shook her head instantly. "No, I can't afford." "I didn't ask for money," he said, cutting her off softly. "I asked if I could help." A long silence settled between them. The girls looked on, not sure what was happening. Finally, Anna asked, "If I say yes, what happens next?" Nicholas glanced at her daughters again. For girls who deserved better than fear and silence and courtroom benches, he looked into Anna's eyes. "Then we fight," he said, "and this time, you won't be doing it alone." The next morning, Nicholas arrived at his office much earlier than usual, but his mind wasn't on meetings or mergers. He had barely slept the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the girls again sitting silently on that bench. Too well-mannered to speak up, too used to waiting, he kept thinking about, and how she looked at him like hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, and how carefully she kept herself from falling apart in front of her daughters. Something about her story stayed with him, not just the wrongness of it all, but how easily it could have gone unnoticed. He had entered that courthouse planning to sign documents and return to work as the same man. Instead, he walked out carrying something unexpected, a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but couldn't ignore. As soon as his assistant Grace entered, he called her over. "I need you to find everything you can on a man named Garrett Brown," he said. "He's a senior partner at Kelmore and Bell." Grace, always composed and sharp, gave him a curious look. "You're not suing him, are you?" "Not yet," Nicholas said, his tone serious, "but I want to know what kind of man he really is before I decide how far I'll go." By mid-afternoon, a thick file sat on his desk. Just as he expected, Garrett Brown had a spotless public record, respected in the legal world. No formal complaints on file, multiple donations to charity. And Garrett Brown wasn't just a lawyer. With influence, he was also an active member of an upscale golf club. But as Nicholas dug deeper, reading between lines and digging through employee turnover records and anonymous reviews, he began to see something more sinister forming. Several women had quietly left the firm over the years. Their exits had been sudden, unexplained, and without any formal allegations. None had spoken publicly, but there were whispers off the record, remarks in niche legal forums, vague warnings, and subtle red flags that had never reached HR paperwork. Nicholas had seen this kind of thing before, the type of man who wore power like a shield, a man who knew the system well enough to bend it without leaving any trace behind. He didn't call his usual corporate lawyers this time. Instead, he reached out to Michael Sloan, a former prosecutor who had shifted to defending civil rights and helping those wrongfully accused. Nicholas hadn't spoken to him in over a year, but when he explained what was happening, Michael agreed without hesitation to meet Anna the next day. When Nicholas called Anna to inform her, she hesitated. Her voice carried caution and fatigue. "I don't want to owe you anything," she said. "You won't," he replied, firm and calm. "This isn't charity, it's justice." There was a brief silence before she spoke again, softer now. "Okay, I'll come." The meeting was arranged in a quiet, private space Nicholas used for personal matters. When Anne arrived, she looked composed but overwhelmed. She had borrowed a cleaner blouse, and her hair was neater than usual, but the exhaustion still showed. In her face, Her daughters were with a trusted neighbor for a few hours, a rare decision. But she knew this meeting mattered. Michael welcomed her with quiet respect. There was no judgment, no pity. He simply listened as Anna explained everything. She recounted the weeks before the accusation, how Garrett had started lingering after hours, how his compliments grew to personal, how invitations followed. She had turned him down gently but clearly. And then, how things changed. Suddenly, his luxury watch went missing, and without any discussion. He had reported her. Michael took notes, but more importantly, he listened like someone who cared. When she finished, she looked down and said quietly, "There's no proof, it's just my word." Nicholas, who had remained silent until that point, finally spoke. "There's more than just your word. There's a pattern. And I don't think you're the only one." Anna looked up, visibly startled. "You found others?" "Possibly," he answered. "Nothing confirmed yet. But we're working on it." Michael nodded. "This happens more often than people realize. Men like Garrett build walls around themselves. But if one part breaks, the rest can follow. We're going to help you file a countersuit for false accusation and workplace harassment." Anna shook her head, disbelief in her eyes. "How will I ever afford that?" Nicholas leaned forward. "You won't." "I will." Her voice trembled. "But why? You don't even know me." He paused, choosing his words with care. Then he said something he hadn't shared with anyone in years. "Because a long time ago, someone helped my mother when no one else would. I watched what happened to her when people chose not to believe. And I made myself a promise that if I ever had the power to stop that from happening to someone else, I would use it, no matter what it cost me." Anna didn't speak right away, but something subtle shifted in her eyes. Not full trust. She had been betrayed too many times for that, but a flicker of something different. A tiny, fragile beginning. As they left the meeting room, Nicholas walked beside her to the door. "Whatever happens next," he said softly, "you're not alone anymore." She nodded, holding the folder Michael had given her. And for the first time since their paths had crossed, she didn't look like someone bracing for disaster. She looked like someone beginning to believe that maybe the worst wouldn't happen. Legal action began quietly. There was no media noise, no headlines, but underneath the surface, tension simmered like pressure building before a storm. Anna's countersuit had officially been filed. The documents didn't make waves, but they were enough to catch Garrett Brown's attention. Nicholas knew what would come next. Men like Garrett didn't let accusations slide. They struck back, quickly and quietly. And just 2 days after the filing, anonymous online posts began to appear questioning Anna's character, implying she wasn't trustworthy. Her employment records were somehow leaked. Disciplinary notes were exaggerated. And there were even vague claims that she had been involved in other thefts, none of it supported by actual proof. Nicholas recognized it instantly. This was Garrett's move: leverage his contacts, stain the reputation before the court ever hears a word, poison the truth before it has a chance to speak. He wasn't surprised, but Anna was. That afternoon, she showed up at Nicholas's office, hands shaking as she held her phone. She had read the posts. She'd seen the comments, cold, cruel, and aimed straight at her. Her voice was low, nearly flat. "They're calling me a liar, a thief. Some of the moms at school, they've already stopped talking to me." She couldn't lift her eyes. "What if this hurts the girls? What if I just made everything worse for them?" Nicholas came around the desk and gently motioned for her to sit. "You didn't make this worse." He did. "You stood up for yourself, and that takes more courage than most people will ever know." Anna shook her head. "I just want to disappear." "You don't get to disappear," he said, firmly but gently. "You have 4 daughters who need you." Standing, tears welled up in her eyes. She looked exhausted, like hope itself had become too heavy. "I didn't want to fight," she whispered. "I just wanted to keep my job and protect my kids." Nicholas sat down beside her, steady and calm. "I know, but now, this isn't only about you. He's done this before, and if no one stops him, he'll keep doing it. You're not just fighting for yourself now. You're lighting the fire that might finally burn his shield down." Something in those words reached her. She breathed in deeply, wiped her eyes, and finally gave a small nod. "Then I guess we keep going." Michael Sloan had already begun expanding the investigation, and with Nicholas funding it fully, the efforts grew fast. He brought on to discreet researchers professionals with legal compliance and forensic HR backgrounds. In just a few days, they uncovered a former paralegal who had worked at Garrett's firm 5 years ago. Her name was Lauren Chase. She had left suddenly and without explanation, although she had signed a non-disclosure agreement. Once she heard Anna's story and realized others might be stepping forward too, she agreed to meet. The meeting was held off-site in a neutral and quiet location. Nicholas, Anna, Michael, and Lauren sat in a small room together. Lauren looked nervous, fidgeting constantly, but eventually she began to talk. She described how Garrett had followed a familiar pattern, offering mentorship, gradually becoming too personal, and then turning harsh when she resisted. After she rejected his behavior, her annual performance reviews dropped inexplicably. She was later accused of mishandling confidential documents, then forced out quietly. Human Resources had silenced it all with a hefty severance check and a warning: if she ever spoke, she'd be sued. Michael leaned in and asked gently, "Do you still have any written messages from him?" Lauren hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached into her bag. "I deleted most of it," she said quietly, "but I printed the worst one before I left. I couldn't let myself forget what really happened." She handed Nicholas a folded sheet of paper. He opened it and read in silence, his jaw tightening as he took in the ugly weight of the words. What lay on the page was unmistakable, manipulative, crude, and shockingly clear. Garrett's intent wasn't just implied, it was written plainly in ink. With that single document, the situation shifted. It was no longer just Anna's word against the reputation of a powerful man. It was a pattern now supported by proof. Michael quickly amended the countersuit, adding charges of sexual harassment and retaliation. They prepared a media strategy carefully worded, backed by facts, and designed to be released if Garrett tried to smear Anna further. Nicholas made the calculated decision to go public, not revealing Anna's name to protect the children, but instead offering a personal statement under his own name. The press release wasn't flashy, but it was powerful. A well-known CEO had come forward to support a woman wrongfully accused, describing the man behind the allegation as someone repeatedly abusive and unworthy of power. The story caught fire. Online whispers turned into conversations. Garrett's law firm issued a statement quickly, claiming they were unaware of any wrongdoing and placing him on immediate leave. The board was forced to launch an internal investigation. Anna watched everything unfold from Nicholas's guest house, where she and her daughters had been staying for a few days. It was the first time in weeks she had felt safe enough to relax, even a little. In the kitchen, she stood quietly, watching her girls draw unicorns and spaceships on the marble counter using dry erase markers Nicholas had given them. She smiled faintly, tiredly, but for the first time, it wasn't just a mask. That evening, Nicholas found her outside in the garden, wrapped in a sweater and gazing at the sky. She turned when she heard him approach. "I didn't think anyone would ever believe me," she said softly. "Sometimes," Nicholas replied, "people need to see a spark before they realize what's already burning." She looked at him not with doubt or gratitude but with a kind of clarity. "I don't know who you were before all this," she said, "but whoever that was, this suits you better." Nicholas didn't answer right away. He thought of all the years he had spent chasing success, building barriers, keeping life simple and distant. Now here he was, completely tangled in a story he hadn't expected, and yet it felt more real than anything before. "I think you might be right," he finally said. In the distance, the sound of her daughter's laughter echoed through the house. For the first time in what felt like forever, Nicholas Evans didn't feel like he was losing control by standing still. He felt like he was finally gaining something that mattered. The court date came faster than expected, not because of chance, but because of pressure, legal, public, and deeply personal. Garrett Brown, once confident in his ability to twist narratives in his favor, was now at the center of a growing scandal. The media had latched onto the case not for scandalous headlines, but for something more powerful: verified timelines, witness accounts, and documented evidence. The courtroom could no longer look away. Nicholas who had once believed his part ended with hiring a lawyer, found himself drawn further in not just as support, but as a public presence, a sign that power could be used to protect, not just control. On the morning of the hearing, Anna got dressed carefully. Her hands trembled slightly as she buttoned the cuffs of a soft blue blouse, one Nicholas's assistant had picked for her. Anna had insisted on paying for it, even when Nicholas refused. It wasn't about money. It was about pride. She wanted to walk into that courtroom not as someone broken, but as someone still standing. Her daughters were too young to attend, so they stayed home under the care of Maria, a retired school teacher who now helped part-time. As Anna prepared to leave, her eldest daughter, Emma, hugged her tightly and whispered, "Be brave, like you always tell us." At the courthouse steps, Michael Sloan was waiting steady, focused and fully prepared. He wasn't a lawyer who relied on intimidation. He believed in clarity and in the power of the truth. Nicholas arrived a few minutes later. His presence, as always, was commanding, but something about it had changed. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. There was calm warmth in his expression. When Anna saw him, she let out a slow breath like she had been holding it in all morning. Inside the courtroom, the tension was thick but silent. On one side sat Anna, composed but tense. On the other side sat Garrett, flanked by a legal team that looked expensive but hastily assembled. His face had the look of someone who had never faced real consequences. But now, even the ticking clock seemed to shake his confidence. The judge began by reviewing the updated countersuit. Michael stood and spoke clear, steadily laying out the full timeline of harassment and retaliation. He backed it with Lauren Chase's statement and the email Garrett had written years ago, now public. When Garrett's lawyers tried to undermine Anna's credibility, Nicholas stood. He asked the judge to speak not as a witness, but as a character. Reference, the judge allowed it. Nicholas adjusted his cuffs, a habit he didn't even realize he had, and stepped forward. "I've spent most of my life building systems that reward power," he began. "And I've come to understand those same systems often protect the wrong people if no one speaks up." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Anna Ray was nearly destroyed by one of those systems, not because she failed, but because she refused to let someone misuse their power against her. She is honest. She is brave. "I have no financial stake in this case, no contract, no partnership. I'm here because the truth matters, and this courtroom only matters if it listens to voices that are too often ignored." The room was quiet, not from discomfort, but from deep respect. Even the judge seemed moved. Garrett's lawyers didn't cross-examine. They couldn't. The weight of truth had started to collapse the fiction Garrett had built for years. The ruling wouldn't come that day, but it didn't matter. Everyone in the room had felt the shift. Anna had been heard, fully, clearly, powerfully, and Garrett, while not legally convicted yet, no longer had silence to hide behind. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Anna held the legal summary close, her hands tight around the folder. Nicholas touched her shoulder gently. "You okay?" She nodded, barely able to speak. "I didn't think I'd make it through that." "You didn't just make it through," he said quietly. "You stood taller than anyone else in that room." They didn't give interviews. There was no script, no PR strategy. Nicholas walked her to the car, and they left without saying much. But the silence between them no longer felt like a gap. It felt like connection. That night, Anna sat her daughters down and told them the truth, not legal jargon, just the part that mattered. She told them she had stood up against someone who tried to hurt her, that she didn't back down, that people had stood beside her, people who believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. They listened carefully. Then the youngest looked up and asked, "Does that mean he's gone forever?" Anna hesitated, then looked toward Nicholas, who had been standing in the doorway, listening the whole time. He stepped inside the room. "He won't be hurting anyone else," he said. "Not anymore." The girls nodded with the quiet belief children still hold that good people win. And for the first time in weeks, the house felt whole again, not just safe, but alive. Later that evening, Anna stepped out onto the porch. Nicholas stood there already, holding a cup of tea and staring at the sky. She wrapped a blanket around herself and stood beside him. "You know what today felt like?" she asked. He turned slightly. What? Like the start of something? I thought I'd lost my voice, a future. He nodded. Then let's build on it. They stood there in the cool air, shoulder to shoulder, not needing to say anything more. The worst had passed, the truth had been heard, and tomorrow didn't feel so far away anymore. In the weeks that followed the court hearing, Anna's life began to shift, not in grand dramatic gestures, but in small, unmistakable ways. The immediate threat was gone. Garrett Brown had been formally suspended from the firm as the investigation continued. The civil case was moving forward, and with media still watching, the legal world began stepping away from him quietly but firmly. What had once been whispered was now openly acknowledged. For the first time in her life, Anna was not being watched with suspicion, she was being seen with support. But even then, healing wasn't instant. There were still moments, there were still nights when Anna woke up breathless, shaken by dreams of being chased through hallways or losing her children in a crowd, in elevators. She sometimes caught herself holding her breath, waiting for something to go wrong. But now, for the first time, she had people in her life who didn't walk away when pressure rose, and no one stood more solidly beside her than Nicholas. What they shared had developed slowly, quietly, without a name. There was no sharp line separating gratitude from something deeper. Nicholas never forced conversation, never pushed her to open up, but he was always there, sometimes in the form of a warm dinner after a draining day, a calm voice when her nerves felt afraid, or just his silent presence on the back porch when she didn't want to be alone. Their connection wasn't built on drama or need, it was built on trust, and neither of them rushed to define it. Nicholas, for his part, had never felt more grounded. In the business world, he'd always been the planner, the strategist, the man thinking 10 steps ahead, constructing empires in boardrooms and financial documents. But none of that had ever felt quite like this. It didn't feel like quietly helping a 6-year-old pour cereal without making a mess, or listening to the girls bicker about which movie to watch, or hearing real, unfiltered laughter at the dinner table, laughter that wasn't planned or polished. He began to spend less time at his office, not to avoid work, but because he no longer felt bound to it. He started trusting his team more, delegating more, and for the first time, he gave his assistant permission to cancel meetings when his heart wasn't in them. Grace, who had worked with him for nearly a decade, raised an eyebrow one day and said, "I don't know who that woman is, but whoever she is, thank her for giving you your soul back." Anna never heard about that comment, but she noticed the change too. Her daughters adored him. They watched for him at the window, ran to him with drawings and silly questions, and treated him with the kind of comfort they'd only shown to each other. One day, Lily, the quietest of the 4, tugged on Anna's sleeve and whispered, "Is he going to stay with us forever?" The question was soft and pure, yet too big for a simple answer. Anna didn't know what to say, so she kissed Lily's forehead and replied gently, "Let's see what tomorrow brings." Nicholas wasn't just watching her life from the outside. He was helping her rebuild it. He introduced her to a friend who ran a respected law firm specializing in family and labor cases. After one interview, Anna was offered a position not as a cleaner, but as a legal assistant. Her organizational ability, her lived experience with injustice, and her steady sense of responsibility made her a perfect fit. She began shadowing paralegals, learning how to document cases, work with clients, and support legal teams from the inside. For the first time, she began to see the legal system not as something that had been used to harm her, but as something she could learn to use to protect others. At night, after the girls were asleep, Anna stayed up studying. She scribbled notes onto notepads and flipped through legal guides until her eyelids drooped. Often, Nicholas would find her dozing at the kitchen table, her pen still in hand. He would quietly drape a blanket over her shoulders, switch off the light, and let her rest. He never treated her like a project, never acted like she needed to be rescued. He simply stayed close, the kind of closeness that made her feel safe, not pressured. Their bond grew in the quiet. There were no dramatic declarations, no scenes pulled from movies. But one afternoon, as they watched the girls chase each other around the backyard, Anna turned to him and asked softly, How did you end up being the one who showed up when no one else did? Nicholas looked at her thoughtfully before answering. Maybe I was supposed to. Maybe everything in my life led me here, even the parts I didn't understand at the time. She didn't say anything more. She just reached out and took his hand. They stayed like that, not out of need. Not because anyone was saving anyone, but because they both chose to be there. He wasn't trying to rescue her anymore. She didn't need rescuing. What they were creating now was something neither had planned, but somehow it felt exactly right. As summer arrived, the house began to feel lighter. The girls thrived at school. Anna started preparing for a certification program that would eventually let her manage legal cases on her own. Nicholas, once consumed by business, now found joy in the ordinary. He cooked badly and the girls laughed at his burnt toast and overcooked noodles. He laughed with them. They built daily rhythms not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Their life was no longer about recovery. It was about living together. There was peace in the simplicity, a sense that, after everything they had lost, the world was finally offering them something whole, something neither of them dared hope for, a kind of happiness that felt steady, quiet, and real. And in that stillness, something new began to grow, not just healing, but a sense of future, a life they could now build together. When autumn came, the air turned crisp, but the warmth in Anna's life only grew deeper. She had found her rhythm not just as a mother, but as a woman who had taken her voice back. Her mornings began early, waking the girls, packing lunches, brushing small braids, exchanging sleepy smiles over cereal. She'd then board the bus to the law office, where she worked part-time while continuing her studies. Her days were full, sometimes overwhelming, but they were hers. She wasn't reacting to someone else's damage anymore. She was creating her own path. At the office, her supervisors admired her commitment, her sensitivity, and her quiet leadership. Clients trusted her because she understood what it felt like to be unheard. Her co-workers leaned on her because she never sought attention, only gave her best to everything she did. Of course, there were still moments of fear, times when doubt crept in, whispering that this could all disappear. But when those thoughts surfaced, she thought of Nicholas's steady hand, the girls' laughter filling their shared home, and she kept going. Nicholas, too, was changing in ways he hadn't anticipated. Success still mattered, but it no longer defined him. He started investing in people, not just profits. Inspired by Anna's strength, he established a small foundation offering legal aid and emergency shelter for single parents, fighting false accusations. What had started as a single act of compassion had turned into something larger, a purpose. He was still Nicholas Evans, CEO, strategist, man of suits and sharp instincts. But now, he was also someone who crouched on the floor to help tie a shoe, someone who remembered birthdays, someone who read stories at night and learned to make pancakes without burning them. Their relationship no longer needed a name. Everything about the way they moved spoke of something solid and whole. They didn't rush to define it. They didn't need to. The rhythm of their life said it all. Nicholas never tried to replace what Anna had lost. He never called himself the girl's father, never acted like he had a right to anything unearned. But the girls had already made up their minds. One evening, as Anna stayed late at work, Nicholas sat in the living room with the girls, helping with homework. Lily, the quietest of them all, looked up suddenly and asked, "Will you be here when I grow up too?" He didn't respond right away. He gently placed the pencil down, looked Lily straight in the eyes, and said, "If you'll have me, yes." The next morning, Anna discovered a drawing on the refrigerator. It showed 6 small figures holding hands for little girls, a woman with long brown hair, and a tall man with a crooked smile. Above it, in bold crayon letters, was one word: family. Anna stared at it for a long while. She didn't cry, but her chest ached with a feeling that was dangerously close to joy. Later that day, she pulled Nicholas aside, took his hand, and said, "They've already decided you're one of us." He smiled softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then I'm home." The seasons kept turning. Eventually, the court case officially closed in Anna's favor. Garrett Brown settled the matter quietly, his public image left in ruins. Anna never gloated. She declined interviews, and turned away the media's interest. All she had ever wanted was peace, and finally, she had it. Sometime later, Nicholas invited her to a formal dinner, hosted by one of his longtime colleagues. She hesitated at first, unsure if she belonged in a room full of polished conversations and sleek suits, but she eventually agreed. When the night arrived, she wore a modest dark green dress, and when she walked into the ballroom on Nicholas's arm, no one saw a woman who had once cleaned offices or fought through scandal. They saw someone who held herself with quiet strength, someone who radiated dignity because she had earned every inch of it. At that dinner, Nicholas introduced her not as a guest or someone he was helping, but as his partner. And when Anna looked across the table and smiled at him, surrounded by people from a world she'd once thought she'd never belong to, she no longer felt like an outsider. She had built something, with him, with the girls, with herself. They never labeled what they had, but both Nicholas and Anna knew this wasn't a passing chapter or a rescue tale. It was a beginning, a life they hadn't planned, but one they were now writing together, word by word, hand in hand. Spring came gently that year, not with fireworks or dramatic changes, but with soft signs of hope. The trees in the backyard of their shared home filled with new green leaves. The girls ran barefoot across the grass, collecting dandelions and inventing games with rules only they could understand. Their laughter became the soundtrack of every evening, echoing through the windows and settling into the walls like warmth. Anna passed her certification exam, not just passed, but ranked among the highest in her class. She hadn't expected that, but Nicholas had never doubted her for a second. When the results arrived, she held the envelope for nearly an hour before opening it, afraid that something might still go wrong. But when she finally read the word congratulations, she didn't cry. She simply smiled, looked up at the ceiling, and whispered a quiet thank you to whatever strength had carried her this far. That afternoon, Nicholas found her in the garden, standing barefoot on the stone path. He didn't ask what the letter said. He just looked at her face and understood. She nodded slowly, and he opened his arms. She stepped into them and laid her head against his chest. For a long while, they stood in silence, to people who had walked through fire alone and somehow found each other on the other side. They didn't need grand declarations anymore. Love had already found its way into their lives. It was there in the way, and always saved the last piece of fruit for him without saying anything. And how Nicholas remembered how each of the girls liked their sandwiches cut, in the comfort of shared silence, and in the courage to speak the truth even when it was small, even when it was hard. It lived in the space they made for each other, not just in their routines, but in their hearts. They didn't try to fix each other's broken pieces. They simply made room for them, honored them, walked forward anyway. When Nicholas asked Anna to marry him, it wasn't some picture-perfect moment beneath a sunset or on bended knee. It was over coffee one early morning while the house was still quiet and the girls were asleep. He handed her a small envelope across the table. Inside was a handmade card drawn by the girls, stick figures holding hands, and written in pink crayon, "Can we keep him forever?" Anna laughed softly, holding the card in both hands. Then Nicholas said, "I'd like to be part of this family officially. If you'll have me." She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "You already are." But she said yes anyway, because some things deserve to be spoken aloud, no matter how clear they already feel. The wedding was small. Just a few close friends, the girls, Michael Sloan, Grace, some co-workers from Anna's new job. It took place in their backyard under a white canopy strung with soft lights. Anna wore a simple ivory dress that floated around her ankles, and Nicholas wore a suit with no tie, a quiet nod to the softness of the day. The girls walked ahead of them, scattering flower petals like they knew it mattered, like they understood that what was about to happen wasn't just ceremony, it was sacred. When the vows were spoken, Nicholas didn't promise to shield Anna or rescue her. He promised to walk beside her, to listen, to grow, to never ask her to dim any part of who she was. And Anna didn't promise to follow him. She promised to challenge him, to stand by him, to never forget what they both had to survive to find this moment. After the ceremony, as the sun dipped low and the air was thick with spring warmth, the girls took turns dancing with Nicholas. Emma wrapped her arms around his waist, looked up, and beamed, "I knew you'd stay," she said. "I couldn't leave." He replied with a smile, "Even if I wanted to, you've got me forever." Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lights had dimmed, Anna and Nicholas sat together on the porch under a shared blanket, watching the stars. They didn't say much. There was nothing left to explain. Everything the courtroom battles, the sleepless nights, the uncertainty, and the slow, hard rebuilding had led to this. Not to a life without flaw, but to a life that felt real, whole. They hadn't erased the past. They had learned to grow around it. In the quiet hum of their shared future, they sat hand in hand, knowing the world would still throw storms their way. But they had become the kind of people who didn't run from uncertainty anymore. They faced it together, and in that stillness, with their house finally at rest, Nicholas Evans and Anna Ray didn't just feel happy, they felt complete. In truth, the ending of their story wasn't loud. It didn't need drama or fairy tale sparkle. What made it powerful was its quiet honesty, its earned peace. This wasn't a tale about a wealthy man rescuing a woman. It was about two wounded people choosing to walk forward not because they had to, but because they believed in each other. Nicholas didn't fall in love with the story. He fell in love with reality, with responsibility, with children who looked to him for presence, not possessions, with a woman who never needed saving, only to be seen. And Anna's journey was never about being rescued. It was about rising, reclaiming her voice, not by shouting louder, but by standing taller. She didn't become someone else. She became fully herself. Their ending wasn't perfect, but it was shared. And that, in the end, is what made it beautiful. Because sometimes the truest kind of love doesn't arrive to save you. It walks beside you after you've already saved yourself.